Hey, it's the Algebra Teacher Goes Power BI. I just want to piggyback off of last week when we did a demo on what a teacher could do with Power BI to make their life a lot easier with data management and data analysis. And so what you're seeing on your screen right now is what I created last week. And if you want to see like how to make some of these basic cards and visuals and how to publish to the service, feel free to go back last week and look at the blog. But as I was finishing up last week, I came up with a lot more questions and answers throughout the week of how a teacher could use this even more to their advantage. The problem is that sometimes we know we want something to show, but it's harder to get a computer to do it than rather us doing it by hand. And so that's where this week I'm going to introduce a lot of DAX functions to get to the end result of what I was hoping for. So let me show what I'm talking about. So let's say I want my students to be more in charge of their data, know what their stuff really means in terms of what the other students are doing and what the whole class is doing. So I'm going to make a student details page here. So with the student details page, I'm going to have all the slicers that I had last week. And what students are the most concerned with is usually what their grade is. And the way we can get a grade is by averaging out, all of your grades if you're on a point-based system. And so just for a quick review, my data source is just an Excel file with a few names, their periods, and just some random assignments, some homeworks, some tests, and some quizzes. And what I did last week, just for a quick review, is I put them all into the Power Query editor. I changed the type of some of them because I needed text versus numbers. I unpivoted the columns because I wanted them, instead of just having all of these columns, I knew that all these columns were just category names of assignments. So I unpivoted those columns, and then I showed what they were with their grade. We did some renaming of columns. I then decided to make a separate column based off of category by doing inserting a text before the delimiter, which was just a space. And finally, I did a column from example to show that anytime it was HW homework, anytime it was TEST test, etc., etc. So this is what the final query ended up being. So I just want to show you that, and we'll come back to this and revisit it later if we need to. All right, so here's what I want to do. I want to make a measure, and the measure that all students are concerned about is what was my average in the class? What is it that where am I currently at? And so one way that we can make a measure is we go up into any table that we have, which in this case I have a gradebook table, and let me zoom in for you. And I'm just going to click on the ellipses and click on new measure. And for this measure, it's just going to be very basic. Once it's working on it now, it's going to come up over here. And for this one, I'm going to call it the basic student average. It's a basic student average. And there's a reason I'm calling it basic, because we're going to get into some very advanced things later on throughout this demo. And the way that I would want to do an average is I'm going to tell Power BI, hey, take an average for me. So I start typing in average. I'm going to tab over to do the IntelliSense. And then I just have to tell it, where do I want the average to come from? Well, I want it to come from the gradebook table, and I want it to come from the actual grade column, because that's where all the grades are stored. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to hit enter. And now this is a measure. And the important thing to know about measures is they're not actually stored in the data source itself. These are run anytime that you put them into a visual. So as you see right now, we don't see any results because, again, this only gets run when you put it into a visual and you want it to run. So let's see if this actually worked. I have a preset table here. So I'm going to click on the table, and I'm going to come over here and check the basic student average. And we get a 72.1. Now what does that 72.1 mean? Well, that 72.1 is the average of all of the students' grades. Because what that measure just did, and we'll pull it up here, is it went and it looked at the grade column in our data, and it added all the numbers and divided by how many rows of numbers that there were. So again, it went into our data source, it looked into the grade column, it added all of these numbers together, and then divided it by 48. And that's how it came up with the, 72.1. So this is how a measure works in a visual. But now let's see what happens if we add new things to this visual. So I'm going to add a name to this visual. I want all the students' names to be added. Now look what we've got here. Now we don't have 72.1 each time. We have 72.1 at the end, but if we look, we have the average of each student. 69.5 is Beatrice's average, because what is happening now is what we call row level context. So what is happening when this average function gets run for Beatrice, what's going on is it's going into our data source. I'm going to pull it back up here again. So let's find Beatrice right here. It's taking Beatrice, and it is taking her grades of 95, 98, 34, 20, 76, and it is taking those numbers and taking the average of them. And then it's going to do the same thing for all of the other people. So this is like a slicer, so to speak, if you really want to think about it. So then it takes the whole table of values, and it only looks at Bill's grades, and then it takes the average of just Bill's grades. And then it does Brett's, and so on and so forth. So now I'm going to add some new things to it. I'm going to add in the assignment, I'm going to add in the grade column, and I'm going to add in the period. Now I'm going to do some quick things here. I'm just moving things around in the visual just so this makes a little bit more sense as we're taking a look at it. So I've got the name, I've got the basic student average. I'm going to put that at the bottom here because that's the final thing we want. The period, the grade. Okay, so let's take a look. So as we take a look, this makes sense. So if we look at row 1, when it's doing our basic student average formula, it's saying I'm going to look at the table. I'm only going to look at Beatrice's numbers for homework number 1, for period number 2, and whatever that grade was. And that's why 95 is matching up 95. Why 98 is matching up 98. Because it's only looking at that that whole table of numbers is being filtered down by Beatrice, the homework number, and the period number, and the actual grade itself. So, which is great. You know, we get to see the individual things, which you're saying, well, what's the difference between that and seeing it in the Excel file to begin with? Well, now what I would want to do as a teacher is I would want to call out how they are doing compared, to maybe other students, either in her class, their class, or all of my classes together. So let's take a look at another measurement I could make here. So I'm going to go back up to Gradebook. I'm going to make a new measure. And let's say that I want to see, I'm going to zoom in here for you. I want to see all the periods and students' final grade average. So what I want Power BI to come back with me is I want to know the average of all of the students. However many students I have, 150 or 1 million, what was the average of all of those students? Well, in order for that number to come up here, we've got an issue. Because remember, this row is always going to be filtered down by the name, the assignment, the period, and the grade itself. And so this is where the function calculate comes into play. What calculate does, I'm going to type it in here for you. What calculate does, it says it evaluates an expression in a context modified by filters. Of course, you could read that on your own. But what we get to do is we get to tell the filters that it's going to use. A regular measurement, the filters it uses is always based on what you put into your visual. It filters it down by the rows and what you have placed in here. But here we can say, hey, these are the filters I want you to use. So what do we want? I want the actual average. And so we made that measurement, which was called basic student average. So I'm going to put in my expression. I want the basic student average. All right. And now my filter is, let's think about this. I want to know the average of all the students, which means I don't want to filter. I want you to look at that column, and I want you to give me that 72.1 number that we had earlier, because that's the average of all the students. And so here's how we're going to do that. The filter, we have to actually use another function, which is called the all function. And the all function, if we see, it says returns all the rows in a table. And it's going to ignore any filters. Ignore. And it's going to return all the rows. Okay, so let's do it. So let me come back here and make sure we have it. So I want all, and it's going to say, well, what table do you want me to look at? Well, I want you to look at the gradebook table. And look at the gradebook table and give me all the rows in that gradebook table. So let's see what comes up here. And I went to my Power Query editor. There we go. Come back over here. Now, again, here's the thing with the measure. You don't know the results until you put it into that actual visual. So I'm going to add our all periods and students final grade average. So I'm going to come up here, click on it, and look what we got. 72.1, 72.1. All the way down, it shows 72.1 because it's ignoring every single thing on this row. It's saying, hey, I'm going to find the average of that column and ignore everything else. Okay, so Beatrice knows now that if she's looking at the final grade average of a student, everyone in the class has a 72.1 on their report card. So now she can, and Bill and Brett can start comparing themselves to those students as well. Let's take a look at another thing that I always like to show with this. So I'm going to come up here and go click on some of my filters. I'm going to click on homework number 2. I'm going to click on period 2. And let's see what we've got over here. So now I've only got homework number 2. I've only got the students from period 2. These were their averages on those homeworks. But take a look here. All periods and students final grade average, it's still showing that 72.1. So the all function disregards any slicers that you put onto the measurement. So it's just something important to know. All right, so I'm going to get rid of all those. And let's put in something else that we might want our students to see. Maybe I want to see how these numbers are affected by my selections. Because here, nothing changes. No matter what selections I make, quiz 2, all the quizzes for second period, that still shows 72.1 because that's the overall average because we used that all function. But let's say I do want to see based on some filter selections. So I'm going to come over here. Let's get rid of all these filters. So we got the basic, everything that we're looking at. I'm going to put in a new measure. And this one I'm going to call, because we're going to use a new function here. This one I'm going to call the class averages broken down by filter selection. So what I'm saying here is that I want this number, this 72.1 number, I actually want it to change based on what I've selected on the outside. So here's how we do that. We start off with calculate again. Okay, but what do we want to calculate? Well, we're dealing with those averages still. So that was our basic student average, and we're going to use that measurement the whole time through. Now, filter 1. Last time we said all, meaning ignore all the filters on the outside. Give me the whole table, the whole enchilada, so to speak. This time we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to do all selected. And let's take a look at what that means. What all selected is going to do is it's going to return all the rows in the table, so far nothing new, or all the values in a column, so far nothing new, ignoring any filters that might have been applied inside the query. Again, so far nothing new. That's what the function all did. It did all of that. It ignored all of our filters, ignored all the row level context. But here's where it's the new part. It says, but keeping filters that come from the outside. Well, what do you mean by the outside? Meaning any slicer controls that we have on the report itself. So let's see how this actually works. So we're going to go with all selected, and now let me start that over because I went into my Zoom. So we're going to go all selected. And all selected based on what? Well, we only have one table. So we're saying look at the gradebook table, and we want you to actually honor the outside filter selections if we decide to have any. Again, with any measurement, we're not going to see anything. I'm going to go back into the demo itself. And for the time being, I think we can, well, let me keep that up because we might look at some things. So now I've got my visual. I'm going to put the class averages broken down. Okay, well, so what, right? Still showing 72.1, 72.1. What makes this difference? Well, different. Let's say I check a filter up here and I put on homework. Now look. Now we're actually seeing the class average broken down by the homework. So the 72.1 is the overall average, but now this is showing us that 77 is the class average based on homework. Well, if I want to know what was the quiz test average, or what was the quiz average, 75.13. But that 72.1 never changes. Well, what about quiz number 1? So quiz number 1, we're seeing only the 64.25s. And we're still seeing all of our periods, but what if I want to look at just first period? Now, first period quiz average was a 59.75. So this is where you can start looking at the data and see how it's interacting with one another. Because what happens is with all selected is it's going to honor all of these selections. So what this all selected has done is it looked at the table, it filtered it down based on quizzes, so it's only looking at quiz grades, then it's only looking at period 1 grades, and then it's only looking at quiz number 1 and 59.75. And if you don't believe me, feel free to go in and look in our query editor and break this down, and you will find that quiz number 1 for that period, the average was actually 59.75. Okay, so we've done three different things. We've talked about our all periods and students' final grade average. So let me come back to that. That was using the all function, which said, I don't care what filters you click on the outside, what rows are in here, I'm only going to look at one column and one column only and find the average. And then we did the class averages broken down by filter selection. This is saying, okay, I'm going to look at that entire column just like the other one did, but I will honor, I'm not going to honor this stuff over here, Jack, Jill, Jim, and John, quiz number 1, etc. I'm only honoring what filters you are selecting outside of the visual. So all selected is only honoring quiz number 1, quiz grades, and first period. All right, so now let's take a look at the next function, which is called the ALLEXCEPT. Maybe I want all of my students to look at their grades based on their period. All right, so let me come over here. I'm going to make a new measure. And as always, I'm going to explain how it works in the best way possible that I think makes the most sense. And again, I know this is all education data, but you can think about this like if you were doing finances and you wanted to compare quarter 1 to quarter 4, or compare all of your sales to 2014, or you wanted to base all of your sales based on another country and see how you're stacking up, or another company, and you had all of your branches and you want to always compare it to another branch, etc. So it's always about the context, how you want to filter your measurements on. So this one's going to be called the student's period final grade average. Okay, so what do? We got to do calculate, because I want to be super explicit on what I want to be filtered on this column. Because again, without any filters, you always get 72.1, because it looks at the whole column and finds the average. But here's what I want to do. I want to take a look at that basic student average, and here's the calculate. Again, calculate always says, well, what filter do you want me to do? Because there's something special you want me to do to it, so what is it? And I'm going to use the ALLEXCEPT this time. So ALLEXCEPT. Let's take a look at what this does. ALLEXCEPT is going to return all the rows in the table. Okay, that's just like what all does. Now here's the new part, except for those rows that are affected by the specified column filters. So now we're going to have an exception to it. So we're going to give you all the rows, but we're going to allow whatever you put in this all except, we're going to honor that for you. Okay, so all selected honored everything that was outside of the table that we selected, any visual slicers that we did. All except is going to honor anything in our actual table itself that we say, yes, you're allowed to use this as an actual. So if we say period, we say, hey, you are allowed to filter based on the actual period. If we say name, we say, hey, you're allowed to use the name to filter down your actual table. And so since I called this student's period final grade average, we're actually going to say, hey, the only filter I do want you to use, so we have to give it a table first, and the table is called gradebook. What column do we want it to honor? Which I know it sounds funny because like all except, like exceptions here, but this is the exception. We're saying, hey, because all gives you everything. It ignores all the row level filters. All except is we say, hey, ignore everybody except this one. This one you're allowed to take into account. And what we want it to take into account is the period. So let me take this over, close it out, and let's see what this does. So we're going to put this in here. I'm going to get rid of all my slicer selections because it'll be easier to see how this data interacts with each other. So let me just clear all those out. This got way down here. Okay. So if we take a look, we see all these 73s, right? 73, 73, 73. Ooh, but now it changes down to 71.21. Well, why did it change? Well, look, when we were at 73, for the student's period final grade average, 73 was for period 2. Then all of a sudden it switched when we got to period 1. Why did it do that? Well, what it's doing is it's taking the average, it's looking at that grade and taking all the averages, and it does not care about the student, doesn't care about the assignment, doesn't care about the period, doesn't even care about the basic student average. It only cares about the average column filtered down by the period because we used the all except. Because this is saying, hey, I'm going to look at all of those grades and I'm going to only filter it based on period. And that's why when we get down to period 1, the filter changes. So what does this tell us? Well, this tells us that the overall grade average is 73 in period 2 and 71 in period 1. So we can say that period 2 is doing a little bit better than period 1 at this point. Now let's take a look. Well, what if we click on some of these things on the outside? Homework, test. Let's see what happens. It's working. It's working. 73. Oh, again, it doesn't care that we're talking about the test. This is giving us the final grade average for period 2 students versus period 1 students. All right, because it's not honoring any outside filters. It's not honoring any inside row level filters except for period. That's the only thing that is filtering our table down by is by period. And I know I've been saying it, you might be going, duh, we get it. But again, I just try to make this as concrete as possible. Just like when I was a teacher, I want to make sure we understand why the numbers are working the way that they do. Okay, last one, and we are done. So I'm just going to type in the measurement and then explain what this means. And first, I'm just going to type it in. And if you want to test yourself, think about it. See what you think it might do in the problem when we put it into the visual. So here's what I'm going to do. And it's not even a new function. It's just the basic function that we've been using, calculate. And I'm going to go back to that all except. So I'll zoom it in here. So what this one is, I'm going to call it, this is called the assignment category average. Because I do have a column that is, and just to show it, and that's why I have this pulled up, we do have a category column, okay? I did make this in the Power Query Editor where I actually put these into categories. So I want to see the assignment category averages. And here's how I want to see it. I'm going to go with calculate. I want to get that basic student average measurement. And here is my filter. I'm going to go with all accept again. So start thinking, what does all accept mean again? And I'm going to go with my table name, which is the gradebook. And I want it to go by the assignment category. And I'm just going to put this in. Closes that off. Closes that off. All right. And you know what? I'm going to change this up a little bit. I want to, well, I'm going to think about what this might do. You know what? Let's make it even harder for you. I'm going to put in a second one. I'm going to put in, just to show you that it can be done. Here's what I've got. So pause it for a second if you want to. Calculate basic student average, all accept, gradebook, gradebook assignment category, gradebook name. Pause it. Cool. I'm going to put this in now. Okay. All right, let's see what this did. 55, 78, 70. Okay, what is this doing right now? Okay, so this is taking our student averages and it's going to filter it down, not based on what's in here, unless in here is the gradebook assignment category and the gradebook name. Let's see if we have that. So I've got you know what? I'm going to get rid of all these filters. Erase all these. Oh, okay. And there's a reason I did that, because take a look. We get 69.5, 69.5, all these 69.5s are for Beatrice, right? And if I take a look at this measurement, where did it go? That's assignment category average. Now, there's no way that she had a 69.5 for homeworks, a 69.5 for quizzes, and a 69.5 for tests. So why am I getting that same number over and over and over again? Let's take a look at the function. Once it pulls up, come on now. All right. So this says, hey, I'm going to filter down your table, not based on these things, unless in your visual you have the assignment category and the name. Okay, well, I've got name. Oh, that's why. This is Beatrice's average for all of her things that she's turned in. Tests, quizzes, and assignments. She has a 69.5 average. And Bill has a 73.5 average based on all things, because this measurement is going to filter down on the assignment category and the name. Well, I don't have category in my visual right now. So even though I put this in, like I said, hey, filter this down by category, it's saying, okay, you didn't give me a category though. You need to put category into the visual in order for me to work. So let's do it. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to click on mine. I'm going to put in assignment category. Let's see if these things change. Okay, so I put in assignment category. It showed at the very bottom here, or far right. Ooh, look now. Look. You know what? I'm going to get rid of all these other ones so we can see it even a little bit more clear. So I'm going to get rid of basic. I'm going to get rid of this. Okay, now let's take a look. Beatrice, right? Homework number 1. 96.5. She was a 69.5 earlier, I believe. Now she's 96.5 because, and those are for 2 homework assignments. This is her homework average. Her quiz average is 57. Her test average is a 55, which if we add those together, that's why she's got a 69.5 overall average. Bill, 52, 90.5. So we're actually seeing the students' averages based on what? Well, it's based on their category and their name. So it's honoring the name and the category. Is it honoring period? No, it doesn't care about period. Is it dealing with these outside slicers? No, it's only looking for what's inside, and it's saying, I'm going to give you back this entire table, filter down, except I will honor a few filters. The filters I will honor. instead of giving you all of the table, I will let you filter it down based on category and name. But key thing, category has to be in your visual and your name has to be in your visual. So again, I hope this was helpful. Those are 4 separate DAX functions that you can use. Do those come to mind right away and give you the results that you might want within 5 seconds? No, you got to think about it. You got to think about what you're trying to show and what filters you either need to ignore or you need to allow into your visual. So again, I just hope this helped. For any of you who are interested in making some apps and Power Apps, that's going to be the discussion for the next 3 blogs that I do. I'm now shifting over from Power BI and doing some Power Apps training. And so I've got a really cool, and it's going to be an education demo again, but you can modify it to meet the needs of whatever you're working with. But if you're interested in making a Power App, stay tuned, because for the next 3 weeks, we're going to build what I call a check-in app for students at a school. And it's just a new technology that I just started learning. I think it's really beneficial. I think the school that I used to work for is actually going to be using the app that I created for them. So again, if you're interested in that, great. If you like this demo, please feel free to like, subscribe, or comment below.